She walked in quietly, her simple dress a sharp contrast to the glittering gowns and designer suits that filled the grand charity gala. Whispers rippled through the crowd almost immediately. Some glanced her way with raised eyebrows, others exchanged smirks behind crystal glasses of champagne. In a room full of status and wealth, she was easy to overlook, and even easier to mock. But what no one knew was that behind her humble appearance hid a story no one could have guessed, and a fortune that would soon turn the night upside down. As the evening carried on, the jokes grew less subtle. People moved around her, treating her as if she didn't belong. She smiled politely, standing alone near the back of the room, unnoticed by the high society guests who were too busy impressing each other. Names were being called out, donations announced with loud applause. The air buzzed with competition. Who could donate more? Who could shine the brightest? Yet, through it all, she remained calm, quietly watching. When the host finally approached her, half mocking, half curious, asking if she'd like to make a small donation, the room erupted in soft laughter. It was cruel, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her purse and handed over a small envelope. The host opened it, expecting a modest check, maybe $100 at most. But as he read the number inside, his face froze, the microphone slipping slightly in his hand. The laughter died almost instantly. Heads turned. A heavy silence filled the hall as everyone stared, realizing the simple woman they had mocked had just pledged a $10 million donation. And in that stunned moment, the entire room had no choice but to see her in a very different light. For a moment, it was as if the entire gala had stopped breathing. The host stammered, trying to regain his voice, while the woman simply stood there, her expression kind but unreadable. Guests who had ignored her earlier now leaned in, whispering urgently to each other, stealing glances her way. Nobody knew her name. Nobody could figure out why someone who looked so ordinary would be writing a check that large, especially when most of the room had only managed a fraction of that. People began making guesses. Maybe she was a lottery winner, or the widow of some rich tycoon. Some even wondered if it was a prank. But as the organizers quickly confirmed the check's authenticity, reality hit harder. There was no mistake. She was real. And her donation was very, very real. The irony stung. The same people who had laughed at her simple dress and quiet manner were now desperate to get close, offering fake smiles and hurried compliments. But she stayed where she was, her hands calmly folded in front of her. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't show anger. She just waited, almost as if she knew this would happen all along. Among the crowd, a few faces burned red with shame. Others, still driven by pride, tried to figure out how they had missed such an important person. Whispers turned into curious stares. The question on everyone's mind was simple but heavy: who was she? As the host nervously asked if she'd like to say a few words, the woman smiled softly. She stepped forward, her heels tapping lightly against the marble floor. The room leaned in, hanging on her every move, every breath, waiting for the story they never thought they'd hear. She stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady but soft. "I didn't come here tonight to impress anyone," she said, her words cutting through the heavy silence. "I came because I believe in the cause." Her eyes swept the room, not accusing, just observant, as if she saw straight through the glitter and gold to something deeper. Some people shifted uncomfortably, while others forced polite smiles, hoping to erase the way they had treated her earlier. In one corner of the room, the gala organizers whispered frantically. They had never heard of her before tonight. No fancy invitations had been sent to her address, no background checks had been run. She wasn't part of their usual circle, the exclusive group that valued appearances almost as much as donations. And yet, here she was, outshining them all without even trying. At one table, a wealthy real estate mogul clenched his jaw. Earlier he had made a joke about her shoes being from a discount store. Now he stared at his half-empty glass, realizing how foolish he must have looked. Across the room, A young woman who had offered only a cold nod earlier now wished she had been kinder. Regret hung in the air like smoke. Still, no one knew the full story. Who was this simple woman who had just rewritten the rules of the night? Some guessed she was in Harris, hiding in plain sight. Others thought she might have built a fortune through hard work, something none of them had really considered until now. But even as the tension in the room thickened, the woman offered no further explanation. She simply turned and walked away from the microphone, leaving a trail of unanswered questions behind her, and a room full of people desperate to know more. The woman returned to her quiet spot at the edge of the ballroom, untouched by the sudden flurry around her. People who had once brushed past her were now finding excuses to get close, offering awkward compliments or pretending they had noticed her all along. The charity gala, once filled with easy laughter and polished conversations, now buzzed with uneasy energy. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was something deeper. Guilt, pride, and a desperate need to understand who they had underestimated so badly. Behind the scenes, the organizers scrambled. A few tried to find her name on the guest list, but it wasn't there. One volunteer claimed she had seen the woman arrive in an old car, parking 2 blocks away and walking to the event. Whispers grew louder, theories wilder. Was she a secret billionaire? A philanthropist testing the true nature of the rich? Each new idea only made the room feel heavier with tension. Meanwhile, a local news reporter who had been covering the event sensed something bigger unfolding. She pulled out her phone, ready to catch any detail that could explain the mystery woman's story. Around the gala tables, some of the wealthiest guests began to argue quietly, their pride bruised. Donations they had made earlier with so much pride now seemed small, almost embarrassing next to what she had given without any fanfare. The woman's simple presence had shattered the polished image of the night. No speech, no grand announcement, just a single act that revealed everything: who truly cared about the cause and who only cared about being seen. Yet even as the room buzzed with questions and shifting alliances, the woman remained calm, almost as if she had seen it all coming. And when she finally accepted a quiet invitation to speak again, the entire gala held its breath, sensing the night was about to change forever. The woman stepped forward once more, her movements slow but certain. The microphone crackled softly as she took it in her hand. The crowd leaned in, expecting her to finally explain herself, her wealth, her reason for being here, her hidden story. But instead, she said something that sent an even bigger shock through the room. "I came here tonight not just to donate," she said, her voice steady, "but to choose where the money goes, personally." A ripple of confusion ran through the crowd. The gala had strict traditions. Donations were pooled together, and a committee, filled with the same wealthy faces who now sat frozen, decided where the money would be spent. But her $10 million changed everything. With a donation that size, she suddenly had the power to influence, to choose projects, to spotlight causes that had long been overlooked. Some of the committee members exchanged panicked looks. They had already planned out how tonight's money would be used, most of it benefiting programs that kept their own names in the spotlight. Now, this quiet woman, the outsider, was threatening to break that system without even raising her voice. The host, still clutching his notes, fumbled for words, trying to steer the moment back to the usual script. But it was too late. Guests murmured among themselves, sensing the power shift. The elegant hierarchy they had built around image and connections was starting to crumble, and it terrified them. And then she delivered the second blow. She revealed that she had been part of the very community the charity claimed to serve, years ago, long before the glitz and luxury. She had been one of the forgotten ones, standing in food lines, sleeping in shelters, invisible to the people who now sought her approval. The air grew thick with tension as every polished smile faded into stunned silence. The room stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. The woman they had dismissed so easily had once lived the struggles their charity was supposed to fight. She wasn't just a donor. She was living proof of the cause they claimed to care about. And now, With her $10 million donation, she had the power to make sure the help actually reached those who needed it, not just pad the gala's image for another year. One of the committee heads, a man known for his lavish speeches and flashy generosity, stepped forward, trying to recover control. He smiled tightly and said, "Of course, we welcome your involvement. Maybe we can find a suitable project together." His voice dripped with a mixture of fear and fake warmth. The woman gave a soft laugh, kind but piercing. "No," she said calmly. "I already know where it's going." She announced a list of programs: small shelters, food kitchens, education scholarships, places forgotten by the committee but vital to real people's lives. She wasn't playing by their rules. She was rewriting them. Applause broke out, slow at first, then louder. But not from the front tables, filled with wealthy patrons. It came from the volunteers, the staff, and the few guests who had been overlooked all night. The ones who understood that charity wasn't about show, but about heart. Just as the night seemed to find its new balance, she dropped one last surprise. She wasn't just making a one-time gift. She had quietly established a foundation, fully funded, independent, and designed to operate without needing approval from any gala, any committee, or any big names. The gasps returned, louder this time. The powerful people who thought they owned the night realized they had lost something far greater than just money. They had lost their grip. And as she turned to leave, her simple dress flowing behind her, the once proud room watched in stunned silence, knowing they had just witnessed the true meaning of generosity and humility. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the woman breathed a deep, quiet sigh. Inside the grand hall, the echoes of her message still lingered, stirring something that no amount of money or glitter could buy. She hadn't needed fancy clothes, big speeches, or a famous name to make a difference. She had simply needed a cause she believed in, and the courage to stand up when it mattered most. Back in the ballroom, the guests slowly returned to their tables, but the night had lost its sparkle. Conversations grew softer, more thoughtful. Some whispered apologies to the staff. Others sat quietly, staring into their drinks, replaying every glance and word they had thrown her way earlier. A few brave souls even talked about getting more involved in the real work, visiting the shelters, volunteering time instead of just writing checks for show. The young reporter who had watched everything unfold packed up her notes with a smile. She knew she had just witnessed a story far bigger than a typical charity event. It was a story about pride, assumptions, and the quiet kind of power that didn't need a spotlight to change the world. As for the woman, she didn't look back. Her new foundation would quietly do what the gala had long forgotten: help the ones who needed it most, without expecting anything in return. She would stay simple, just as she had always been, trusting that real kindness didn't need to be loud to be heard. And somewhere in the night, as the stars stretched across the sky, the simple woman who had once been mocked became a silent legend, proof that true generosity wears no crown and that sometimes the smallest voice can leave the biggest echo.